Here we go. Here's the truck showing up. Gonna drop off all the parts for Desert Bloom Observatory. You'll notice we have a platform deck that we already put together, made out of composite decking materials to withstand the weather. And we put the observatory, Desert Bloom Observatory, we're going to mount that on top of the deck. Here the truck has showed up with the parts for the observatory, the Sky Pod Observatory. Hey, who's that good-looking guy? Okay, and look at that lady. So here we go. This guy's going to unload the parts for the Sky Pod Observatory all the way from Canada. The Sky Pod Observatory is made by Wayne and Lorelei Parker. They're the owners of Sky Pod Observatory. So we delivered all the gear, and the truck goes away, and we have to make the driver wait 15 minutes while we check the inventory as we go through and check all the parts. He takes a little break too. We told him, hang on. We got to make sure we have all the parts. So we go through the complete inventory, and there it is. There's the door panel. That's from a separate mold. And then you see the other side panels. Those are molded separately also. And then you'll see the bay panels. And we'll figure out a way to bolt all this stuff together and make the Desert Bloom Observatory. There's the bay pods. Those are the bays right there. You'll see how we put this all together. That's a lot of cardboard, for crying out loud. But we'll store that, and we'll find a good use for that later on too. But you'll notice we put the deck out in the middle of the open area because we want to be able to put our telescope in there, and that way we won't have to disassemble our telescope every time we want to take it apart at the end of a shoot. So the long-term goal is to have the telescope inside the Sky Pod Observatory. They call it the Desert Bloom. There's all the parts. Those are the parts for the half domes. We'll take 2 half domes, and you'll see how they slide into each other to make it accessible for the sky. And there we are. We're down in the Sonoran Desert in St. David, Arizona, the home of the Desert Bloom Observatory. We got all the parts laid out. And then the first thing you have to do is you have to treat them. Use a little paint thinner to wipe off any excess left over from the molding process, because they're a hot extruded mold. So you wipe down the joints with some paint thinner so that the Lexol sealant, after you get it all bolted together, you put the Lexant sealant on there to seal up the gaps to make it completely weatherproof. You can see how it's a double-walled panels and a double-walled roof to withstand the extreme heat in the summertime. We'll probably have to figure out something else to put over it for a cover and a reflective for the sun in the summer heat. But right now it's late autumn and the weather's pretty nice, as you can see, and we're figuring out how to bolt it together. And the first thing we're doing is we're putting the half pods, half domes together, and we'll bolt them together and then put some Lexol on them to seal the gaps. And it's important to measure and double check your work, because the idea is that eventually the whole structure is going to sit right there on that deck as a semi-permanent fixture. So And you can see how we're flipping it and turning it and bolting it together and measuring and working together as a team. You really don't want to do this by yourself, but we're lucky enough that we can work together and get things done. So there, as we put the half domes together, you'll see one dome, they got a half dome, and then another half dome, and then the way it's lined up, that'll sit on top of a cylinder made of the other parts, and then the dome will open itself into another one. And so you can see this is a speeded up video of how we put it together. So, because I normally don't move that fast, just in case you were wondering. So, checking it out and measuring, and the most important thing is they sent a video of how to put it together on a USB card. And that was very, very helpful for putting together. After we examined the parts and studied the inventory, watched the video probably at least 5 times first, figured out what we needed to do. And there we go. You can see as we're measuring and fitting it together and putting the screws in and putting the bolts in and putting the extruded double wall plastic components together. And then once you put the Lexol on it, which is kind of a rubbery compound, you have to let that dry, and so it kind of sets up a little bit as a sealant. The nice thing about the Lexol, it doesn't necessarily harden, but it's a very well sealed rubber. It's like a rubber sealant, and so it's going to let you have a little bit of flex as you move the parts around, but at the same time it's going to maintain the seal. So here we are, we got half of that dome put together, and now we're going to put the other half together. It's a cloudy day. The big guy's wearing a pair of sweatpants with some shorts, so he must have been a little chilly that day. But you can see how we have an open spot. You know, because when you're shooting the telescope, imagine 30-degree angle. You're not necessarily going to go under 30 degrees, but you want to be able to have a good 30-degree angle out of your telescope, and then the full expanse of the sky. So you can see there we are putting the other half of the dome together. And we'll put that half of the dome together and we'll set that off to the side, and then we'll start putting the bottom half of the sky pod. The soon to be completed Desert Bloom Observatory. You can see how our pile of tools gets bigger and bigger as we figure out which tools we need and which tools might come in handy as we try to squeeze things together and get the bolts to line up on the holes. Because the general tolerance is anywhere from a 1/2 inch to 1 inch on these extruded pieces that you have to bolt together. So you'll see as we get into putting the base together, we had a little more work getting all the bolts to line up, but it was amazing that once we got going and we watched the videos, we were able to figure it out. It was, if you've ever put together a model car, it's kind of like that. You got all the pieces, you got an idea what it's supposed to look like, and then there's a little bit of trimming and adjusting, and you measure and remeasure. Of course, when you're putting together little car models, at least I never measured anything, but if I were to do it again, I'd do more measurements. But we did enough measurements on this, double checking our measurements and double checking our gaps and putting the Lexol sealant on there. And you can see how we have lots of bolts and screws. That whole box there is full of the necessary hardware to put together. You can see with right there I'm wrapping a strap around the outside to hold that dome together a little tighter, because we're trying to achieve a specific distance on the size of the dome, because you want them to be consistent so they fit with each other. And the more you check your work as you go, then that should make it easier once you get to the point of putting it all together. So there we are. You can see how the composite decking is going to be able to hold this whole sky pod when it's all put together. And that'll give us an extra 14 inches really, because we got about an inch there off the bottom of the deck, and then that's a good 12-inch beam there, and so that gives us an extra foot of elevation just in case we were ever to have any kind of rain or weather or flood or a little water backup. We're out in the desert, but it still rains once in a while, so you have to have it a little elevated. So there we are, bolting the dome halves together. And you measure, and then you get those bolts in. And it's really important because we're using clamps and holding things together and making a good, firm connection on everything. And then we see how we lay the glued together pieces, bolted and glued with Lexol. When we put those together, we let them sit there on the cardboard and dry so that they don't get covered with sand. Because once we get it all put together, we'll even use more Lexol and seal up the joints even tighter. Because you can see there's just a little bit of wind once in a while, and we don't want any sand or dust in with our telescope. Sand and dust, not good for glass. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make a nice, clean environment to keep our telescope in, so we can have a good viewing sessions for looking at all the planets and stars and galaxies. Desert Bloom Observatory. And you'll have to like us on Facebook and check out the websites to see the kind of pictures and images that we can capture with this telescope. But the nice part is we're going to have this observatory to put the telescope in, so we don't have to tear the telescope down every time we want to take a break from viewing and looking at the stars and the planets. So here we go. There we go. We got the dome. We're looking at the dome, checking it out one more time. Looks like we're getting ready to put on the weather stripping here. The weather stripping's an important part of sealing the thing, and so it has a nice seal to it when it's sitting there and keeping the weather out. And that's just a regular weather stripping that you can get at any hardware store, but it came with the kit, and so we put it on there. And you'll want to make sure you check us out on YouTube also. The Desert Bloom Observatory. Check us out on YouTube and see all the groovy images. So here we are, we're putting this weather stripping on, and you got to put it on and then you screw it in place, and the same thing when you're all done. Then you use the Lexol to seal it up. And you can see how we don't have too many obstacles interfering with our elevation once we get over about 30-degree angle. You can see we trimmed some trees, and there's probably just that one mast out there, but that's pretty low angle, so we're not too worried about it. But here we are putting the weather stripping on, and as we're doing it, it seemed like it went pretty smooth, and as I'm watching the video, it's going pretty good on the video too. But we're not setting any land speed records as far as putting it together, but we're getting it done. And we're doing it and getting it done. And that's the important thing. And it's okay to stop. There's no rush. There's no rush to get it together. We're just trying to put it all together so it goes together right. And hopefully, in the end, it all fits together. So as we put that weather stripping on, that's going to seal, and we'll be able to go back and make adjustments to it. But you try to do it right the first time, and you try to measure it right the first time, and there's always going to be little variations and little adjustments you have to do. We take plenty of breaks, drink lots of water, and keep watching the videos. It seems like every time you watch the video that they sent on the USB from SkyPod up in Canada, seems like every time we watch the USB we learn or spot one more thing that we need to pay attention to. Jim knows how to make a sit-down job out of anything. See how he snatched that chair and sat down? That's because he knows how to make a sit-down job. That's right. It takes skill. That's years of old world craftsmanship coming right at you. Don't be scared. You can do it too. Okay, here we are. We're moving the half domes out of the way, and look at this. Here we come. Bringing all the parts together. I'm going to put this base together. Put them side panels in. Yeah, get them all lined up. And then we'll move it around and get it in a position of where we want it. Yeah, little adjustment here, adjustment there. Not that you can't move it once you're done, because the last thing we're ever going to do as far as the installation, the last thing we're going to do is put some bolts through the frame down into the deck to attach the SkyPod to the deck. But we'll take care of that way at the end. Meanwhile, we still have to get this put together and see how it all kind of snaps together. But then as you look closer, it's key and really critical to get the bolts lined up in the holes. So, and this is a crucial part. You'll see we lift and we use straps and we use blocks and wedges and put things together. So And the weather was cooperative. We had decent weather, and it wasn't scalding hot, because it's late autumn here in the Sonoran Desert, St. David, Arizona, home of the Desert Bloom Observatory. Thanks Wayne Parker and wife Lorelei for showing us the video and giving us tips on how to put the thing together. They were very helpful. I would recommend anybody who's interested in having an observatory, they're the people to contact. Because it was and it is a fun project as we get it put together. You can see we're going and putting the bolts in and lining things up. So, and on the windy days, well, at this point it didn't matter because we're still putting the bolts in and getting things to connect. That fella sure has some nice looking legs, doesn't he? Yep. Okay. So you can see how he's using the wedges to lift and the hammer and using the clamps to get the bolt holes to line up. And then eventually you'll see the introduction of some power tools as they do a little trimming on the plastic. Because we will wind up trimming a few things to make them fit together. Because the molds came out of, the different parts were out of different molds. The 3 bays, they came out of one mold, and then the side panels came out of another mold, and that door panel, that must have come out of another separate mold. So all 3 of them had different sets of holes, and like say the tolerances were within an inch, but when you're trying to put a bolt through and connect things, an inch, you're looking for the tolerances, so you'll have to trim a little plastic to make things fit. So, but you can see how we have the 2 dome halves sitting there off to the side. We got the sealant on them, and they're drying and just waiting for their opportunity to get lifted on. But we have to tighten these things up and check the circumference and do some other hardware gadgets as part of this construction of the base before we put the dome on top. And it was tricky getting those bolts lined up. We had to use I call it a nibbler. And the big guy here, he's trying to point out to you how he's putting things together. So, he's talking about putting the dome up on top of the cylinder there. Pointing out the fine details. That's old world craftsmanship. With the weather stripping there to keep the moisture out. You see how he tilts it back. And there's a metal track. See that metal brace there? That's important because the wheels are going to roll on that. And we'll put those wheels on top. And you'll see we have the wheels already established up there. And the metal rolls on those wheels. And that's what makes it go around. See? There. And you'll see how the mold reaches over from the dome. The mold reaches over the top of that. And so the only thing that it's resting on, those wheels, the weight of the dome is on those wheels. You see how we have the bolts lined up and through the holes. And then he's pointing out places where to put the Lexel, those seams. We'll fill all those seams eventually. And it'll be multiple layers as we fill those seams to put the SkyPod Desert Bloom Observatory together. So now we're going to run through a few of the tools. He's showing you the rasp. That's handy for filing down some of that plastic, making things fit. You'll see some power tools there too. What's a hammer for? There you go. That's what not a hammer, a rubber mallet. Put together with the rubber mallet. Here was a key tool. That was the nibbler. Thanks to our friendly neighbor Jim, for borrowing us that, what do they call it, an oscillating cutter, battery operated. And you can see that's a good trimmer for shaving little layers of plastic off, a little bit at a time, to make it fit. It's almost like a oversized beard trimmer, really. But it's a handy tool, and it was very, very handy and very useful. And a rat tail file, right? Was that the rat tail or was the half round? We had the rasp there. We had the strap for maintaining a circular. There's a clamp. We use the clamps for getting things together, holding things together as we needed to. Because then you're lining up the bolts. Then we had a drill. Yep. And we had a grinder there too. Somewhere in there should be a grinder. Because I used the grinder too. And now we're doing the final measurement to check the circumference. Or the diameter, as it were. Check the diameter. Make sure everything's fairly lined up. See, there's a little bounce right there on some of the gaps. But overall, the metal plate and the dome is going to rotate on top of there. So that will work just fine. And as we point out the detail, you can see it's a double-walled, pretty heavy-duty extruded plastic mold, and bolted together and tighten up the seams. And we trim the excess plastic off and watch for any bruises or nicks. And then we'll put on the Lexel and we'll trim up near the bottom, and you can see there's a gap there, and we'll fill that gap. And we'll most importantly, keep the sand and dust out and the moisture when it occasionally we get a sprinkle or a rain out here in the desert. You can see how I've done some grinding there to make things fit. And there's the door. And I don't know if if it's important or not, but to me it seemed important that anytime I was working on that door panel, I made sure I had the door closed so that it wouldn't diminish the integrity of the structure by having the door open or twisted or bent or anything else. I always wanted to have that door fully intact. And you can see the bolt there. See how the bolts were a little long? We went down and we picked up some long bolts because we were having trouble getting things to line up. So we used some longer bolts, and then we pulled them all the way through. And then we'll go back and use a hacksaw and cut those bolts off. And then we'll put a rubber cap over it so it won't scratch if you happen to bump up against it while you're using the telescope. But the long bolts were helpful in getting it put together. That was a good little quick adjustment for us, and it seemed to work out just fine. And there's the door working. It's important to have the door fit up on top, right? Especially, you don't want any little extra gaps. If you're going to have a gap on the door, you want it at the bottom. You don't want it on the top. You want the gap at the bottom. So if there is any dust or water seeping in, it seeps in on the bottom, not up on the top. So there's the cylinder all set. Looks like we're all set to put the dome on, doesn't it? I think we're gonna double check the measurement, the diameter of the dome one last time, just to make sure it's consistent. So it's round. So it's round, not oblong. We want it round. And so if we have the same measurement, if we measure the same across at all the different points of reference, then it'll be nice and round. Because the idea is to have it round, because our dome is going to swing and turn on the thing. So that's what we got to have. So there we go. It's going to be the Desert Bloom Observatory, looking inside the bay. Oh, have we cut those off? I guess we're going to go cut those off right now. See, the other ones were a little shorter, but that one was a little long. We had 3 of them that wound up being. We used 3 longer bolts to get them to put together. So we use a hacksaw, and we just find the groove and cut away on it. Right? And there we go. We just cut the bolt off. And that's what a hacksaw can do for you. So we're cutting away and cutting the head of that bolt off, and then you'll see we'll put the plastic caps on there. Just trying to take care of things as we go and try not to miss any steps. So, and keep it safe, You want to work safe and you don't want anybody to get hurt. So that bolt sticking out like that, somebody's going to catch on that and rip themselves open. We won't want that. So, and we'll cut the bolt off. And you can see you use the teeth of the hacksaw, because all the teeth of the hacksaw just point in one direction. So you lift as you're coming back. There you go. You'll see you get this started, and there you go. Start to cut. Just hold it there and cutaway. Look at that. Jim was even wearing long pants that day. Yeah. So here we are. Yep, I'm gonna check the diameter one last time before we put those dome tops on. Oh, there, Gigi's deciding where she wants this thing lined up at. We have the door. The door panel is predominantly on the north side, so that's where she'll be entering and exit the Desert Bloom Observatory, from the north side. So as the Desert Bloom Observatory goes together, we're thinking, wow, what a blessing to be able to live out here and look at the stars at night and check out the planets. We don't have too many cloudy or rainy days, so we should get lots of opportunities for stargazing and checking out the galaxies. And it'll really be nice not to have to disassemble the scope every night after we're done. And the important thing is you can leave the scope up, and then you've saved yourself the additional 45 minutes or hour that it takes for setting up and acquiring the polari and calibrating your distances. And we'll skip those steps because we'll have the telescope already set up, so we'll save time, and that'll give us more time to actually check out the planets and the galaxies. So the first couple key hours of darkness, there's a lot of things a person can miss, So when we go out and we see the polari, then we know it's there, and do a quick double check to make sure we're calibrated and on track, and then we'll be off chasing the stars. So it'll be a time saver, life enhancing, right? Isn't that the idea? The idea is to have life enhancing, opportunities and projects in your life. Who wants to spend time on things that aren't life enhancing? I don't have time for that, and I don't think you do either. So here we go. And there she is, cleaning up the Desert Bloom Observatory. Because just sitting there just a little bit, there's dust and dirt collects. We want to keep it as clean as possible, especially when you're dealing with all that glass. So your best friend is just to keep things clean as possible. So that's what we do. And so as we put the Desert Bloom Observatory together, we're mindful that this is a good project, and it's kind of a once-in-a-lifetime thing. I can't imagine ever putting together another observatory, so it's okay to take your time and do it right. So hopefully that's what we've done. Yeah, and as we get this cleaned up and get ready to put the dome halves on top of the base, and we're that much closer to being well along with our Desert Bloom Observatory. You know, the tools we used, we borrowed the nibbler, the oscillating trimmer tool, borrowed that from the neighbor, and I had a small grinder, and I had a small battery operated drill, and a couple of files, and a rasp, and some wrenches, and a few other hand tools, and a good sized rubber mallet, and a strap for maintaining the integrity of the circle that we were looking for instead of an egg shape, because we want to as close as we can get to a perfect round as we put the dome halves on top of the cylinder. So there it wasn't that complicated of an equipment list, you know. And you saw I was able to, with Gigi and I together, we were able to lift and move most of those components and put them on. So yeah, it's a doable project for anybody who's passionate about looking at the observatory and looking at the stars and looking at the planets and astrophotography and space junkies. So it's a project you can do. You can do it. And so here we go. We're almost to the point where we're going to be putting the dome halves on. It's just another beautiful day, sunny day in Arizona, St. David, Arizona. We're about plenty of sunshine. You can see it's the late autumn because the trees have already dropped their leaves. You know, in the summertime, in the spring, those trees will leaf out, but they won't be too high. They won't interfere. The couple of trees that were high enough to interfere with the observation and the telescope, we've trimmed those back. So you'll see in future videos, you'll see how the trees bloom out and green out. It's a lovely setting with the sand. We work to keep the sand down, and we keep it groomed, and we have the sky pod set up there, and we're gonna put the cap on the dome here shortly, and then you'll see how we seal it up and spin it around. And as we look at the Desert Bloom Observatory and think about how clean it needs to be. Here's Gigi. She just wants to keep it clean. She wants to keep the dust and the dirt off of it. So she's wiping it down. The big guy must have taken a bathroom break or something, because she's busy cleaning things up and he's nowhere to be found. So, or it might have been nap time. I take a lot of naps nowadays. So, but Jim will be returning shortly as we put the dome together. So here we go. All right, it's action time. Look at how fast they're moving. That speeded up camera, so you can see these are the little rubber nibs to put over the bolt ends to keep people from getting scratched. those came in the hardware kit, but you could find more of them at the hardware store. That was the funny thing, is most of the hardware to put this together were common off-the-shelf hardware items. They came in the kit, but as I looked through them, I could see that there were common hardware items, so that if I lost one or forgot where I put them or something, I knew I could go to the hardware store and get another one. Here we're showing how we use the wedges to hold the things together and get the angles, and that was good for when we were trying to line up the bolts. We'll keep that strap around one more time, because when we put the dome on top, we'll want to make sure we're still circular as we bolt it together, because the dome has to bolt together up on top of the cylinder also. And we're always constantly, I know in the course of doing this, I went back and double checked the measurements a half a dozen times and made minor adjustments as we tried to fit things together. There I am filing the burr off one of the bolts that we had cut before we put the little rubber cap on it. Just get that burr off of there. You don't want to overdo it, but it's good to knock the burr off. There's a tubal Lexel, Lexel, good stuff, rubbery, good rubber. There's other people might be using silicone, or maybe there's some other product, but this is the one that's recommended, and it costs maybe a little more, but I'm very satisfied with it, and it's the product that was recommended, so we go ahead and use that. And that cleans off, just in case you wind up getting a finger full and starts drying on your fingers. It cleans off with a little bit of paint thinner on a rag. And there I'm putting just a little squirt of Lexel on that little nub before I put that on the bolt. And that'll just sit on there. And that'll be rubbery. It's not going to harden, but it will dry, and so it'll be held on there rubbery-like. So with a little bit of effort, you can take it off if you need to, but you shouldn't need to. These are right here. These are the brackets. Those are the brackets that are going to mount. And you're going to see how they're going to mount a wheel on there, and that's going to help guide. It's going to help guide the half dome as it rotates around on the steel track on top of those wheels. Those are almost like wheels off a rollerblade, right? Remember the old rollerblade boots that you used to put on and rollerblade around? Well, they use the wheels. We use those wheels for making our dome rotate. It's a good design. And here I'm just double checking to make sure that the pins and the bolts will all go together properly. Just double checking, clearing out the holes a little bit. Anything I can do in advance just to prep the gear so it'll go together just a little easier is worthwhile. And I put the bolt through there. That serves as an axle, and then you'll see I'll get the roller in there, right? I'll get that roller in there, and then you'll show how that roller will mount on the inside of the dome once we put the dome on. So here we go. We must be just about ready. It looks like we've got the track on. We've got the guides ready. I think it's time to put the dome halves up on top of the Sky Pod Observatory. So here we go. Alright, we got our Olympic weightlifter Gigi there. She's gonna give the heave-ho on her end, and I'll give the lift on the other end, and we'll get her up on top. Step up on top. There we go. Placed. It's just that simple. That wasn't even speeded up. And look how quickly we lifted that right on there. Just the two of us. Just the two of us. You and I. And you can see how the dome is turning, right? See how it's rotating on those rollers that we put in. And so now we're attaching the brackets just enough to hold them so that if we get a gust of wind, it won't blow them off. And there we go. Double checking the dome. I think I was astonished that it fit together so well. I couldn't believe it. I had to double check it and triple check it and quadruple check it. But you watch the video and you feel like you know what you're doing, and then you put it together, and all of a sudden you're that close to having it put together, and you can't believe it went that smoothly. So, really a good project. And as we bolt down, we'll bolt down and hold it down just so it won't blow off, and secure it, and then we'll put the other half up shortly. You see, I keep all the tools handy because you never know what you're going to need next. You have to do a little trimming here, a little trimming there, and there'll be things to seal up, and we still have lots of sealing to do as far as putting on more Lexel, filling in the seams, and we'll even put some Lexel down around the bottom, seal things up. I don't need any critters, we don't need any bugs, and we don't need any moisture, and we don't need any dust. So, because we'll leave the telescope set up out here during prime time viewing season, and we'll see how that goes. And now you can see, there she is, waving at you as the dome rotates. See, we got it there. And that rotates easy enough just by hand. So that's good. And now we'll put the other half up. It almost looks like something right out of a sci-fi movie from the 50s, doesn't it? It's crazy. But There we go. We got the hardware, we got the parts, and we're bolting it together. And it's another clear day, another clear sky, and we hope the skies will be that clear at night so we can get lots of good viewing in. Checking out the stars and the planets in the Desert Bloom Observatory. We built the Sky Pod from Canada. And here we go. There she is. She pops in, she gets inside, and we're putting the brackets on. Making sure those brackets are on to hold it on. Just enough to hold it on so it won't bump off when we put the other half of the dome on. See, I had a little box with the hardware parts so that we wouldn't lose the hardware. Well, there's nothing worse for me than trying to put together a project and you lose bolts or drop the washers or lose the screws or misplace stuff. So it's nice to have the little bowl where you can just, or a little container like that where you can keep track of the stuff and it doesn't disappear or walk away or you forget where you put it, because I have problems with all that stuff. So I never considered myself a real handyman. I always worked on projects and put stuff together and putzed around and fixed stuff. That's what I did over the years, but I never thought of myself as super handy or super project oriented. Certainly have no art background, and I didn't do much better. I didn't do any better I did slightly better in shop than I did in art. But I think that was just because the instructors were a little more forgiving. The art teachers were brutal to me. But these projects like this is a good way to challenge yourself and without going overboard, and give your imagination the time to work a little bit and exercise your brain. Or you could sit inside and stare at TV. Take your pick. What do you want to do? Get busy living or get busy dying. That's what they say, right? So anyways, it's a life-enhancing experience, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad we did it. We put it together. Here we go. We're going to put this other half of the dome on, and then we're going to continue along on the project. What do you suppose Jim's doing there now? Staring at the hardware. Okay. Counting the bolts, making sure he's got enough. It's always a process of checking and double checking and making sure you're doing the right steps. So seems easy enough. Another bracket. They actually send you 5 brackets, but that's bracket overkill, so I think we just went with 3. Because what they do is they guide and hold the dome half on. So the key part was getting the wheels to make sure the wheels lined up on the plates that we put on the bottom of the dome half. And now we put these clamps, we put these guides on, and they'll guide and hold the dome half on there. And you can see we have the clear skies, and we're looking forward to it. It's going to be a good day to get the project done as we move along. Put the dome halves together. So as we're putting the dome halves together, of course you're thinking ahead. You're trying to think ahead and say, well, what's next on the project? Well, we'll put that other dome half on, and then we'll have to use some trim around the joints where the joints come together, because the idea is we're trying to make it waterproof and dustproof as best we can. It's good this is out in the desert Bloom Observatory, but there's occasional dust, and we do get enough rain to sustain some plant life and wildlife out here, so it's going to have to be watertight too. Put the brackets on. We got one more bracket to put on in the back there. And there you can see as Gigi rotates the dome, making sure it stays on the track. If we've measured everything and we've kept things circular, then that shouldn't be a problem. And you can see how we're looking at the joint, see how we're lining up the joint of the bottom with the joint on the top, because that's a key component right there, is making sure those wheels ride over the joints at the proper spot so they don't get hung up. And that's what Jim's checking right now. He's making sure that wheel. I don't know if we're going to get in there and get you a picture of that or not, but I can see that's what we're doing right there, is we're making sure that wheel rides over that joint at a smooth spot so it doesn't get hung up, so the dome will turn nicely when it's all put together. Well, while we're waiting, make sure you please subscribe to us in YouTube. Look for the Desert Bloom Observatory in YouTube and subscribe to us, and you'll get to see all the images of the galaxies and the planets and the stars and anything else that's riding across the sky. That's at the Desert Bloom Observatory on YouTube. What was that bird? There was a big bird just flew through there too. Okay. Well, let's get back to putting this observatory together. We got the dome halves put together. We got the cylinder put together. We got one of the dome halves on. That's called the primary. That's the primary dome, and the other one's called the secondary because it moves out of the way. And what we'll do is we'll be putting the second. We already got the primary dome attached, so we'll be putting the secondary dome on shortly. And as we do this, you can see the dome itself is going to move right along. There we go. We're getting the dome halves put together. All right, so here we are. We're looking at the dome halves now. We must be getting ready to put the secondary dome half on. We'll have to get a new camera angle here. And so there we are. We have the dome half on. We have the secondary dome half on. And we're going at the joint and putting the Lexel and the trim around that joint, making it as waterproof and airtight as we can. So make sure you check us out, Desert Bloom Observatory, on YouTube. Thanks a lot, and dark skies to y'all.